just very quick outline of what we're going to cover. I'll do a quick welcome, some administration. We'll talk about the wider project, then look at this contract, and then look at the procurement requirements, because clearly that's a real focus. And then at the end, we'll do a quick briefing about the site visit and take question and answers. So I'm John Sawyer. I'm the Deputy Executive Manager of the Project Management Unit, and we'll translate the gobbledygook in a minute or so. And when we come to the environmental and social aspects, Menaka and Nello will join in. But mostly you're going to hear my voice in this particular presentation. So some admin. You may have noticed that a recording has started. So this event is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the LHDA website. So there will be there is in the RFP, request for proposals, one of the returnable forms is a statement of attendance at this pre-bid briefing and a statement about the site visit. So the site visit is not mandatory, but you are required to declare that you have familiarized yourself with the site if you fail to pitch up tomorrow. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. If there are others who are not on this call and need to check in on the briefing, as I said, they'll be able to do that online. At the end, there will be a Q&A session. I'm going to push through fairly hard now to cover quite a lot of material. And any contractually relevant or procurement relevant questions, we will formally respond to those using due process requests for clarification and clarification notices. During the Q&A session, I and others on the team will do our best to give off-the-cuff answers. But if you want something that's, let's say, contractually binding, then you need to formalize that through the correspondence. You're muted at the moment, and so please use the chat function to ask any questions, and we'll address those. I mean, that has the advantage of keeping control of a very large meeting and also giving us a record of any questions, so we can actually respond to those later. But if you have issues to raise as we go through the session, put them on the chat function, and we'll see what we can pick up at the end. And certainly anything substantive, we will aim to give a written response in due course. Next bullet there on the slide is the anti-corruption policy, conflict of interest. So the LHDA anti-corruption policy is included in the request for proposals document. Your submission does include a declaration of any potential conflict of interest. Many of you will be aware there's a history in the distant past of corruption problems with the Sutu Islands, including fines and jail sentences and so on. During phase 2, we've had, to the best of my knowledge, no incidences of any corruption at all, and we aim to keep it that way. And one of the areas is to try and ensure that we don't have a conflict of interest. And just to emphasize on that conflict of interest, if you declare some potential relationship, whatever it might be, between yourselves and the project, then we can easily address that and make sure that, for example, some relative is not involved in the evaluation of your proposal. And then there's no conflict. If you don't declare it and it's found out afterwards that there was some close link between a bidder and someone involved in the process, then that causes horrible problems. So please, we are not trying to exclude people. We're trying to make sure that we don't run into conflicts later down the line. So check out that conflict of interest, and if there is anything potential, just declare it, say what you've done, what the issue is, and we can then ensure that that doesn't give problems in the evaluation process. Then I'm just going to do a quick note on health and safety issues. So particularly for the site visit tomorrow, I'm sure many of you, not everybody on this call, but many of you will be going on the site visit tomorrow. Use a suitable vehicle. Several of us were on site last week. The road conditions might be described as variable. There are some very good sections of road. There are some very potholed sections of road. There is a short bit of gravel road driving, and we've had lots of rain over the last few weeks. So you do actually need a 4x4. I'm sure someone can demonstrate that it's physically possible to get to where we're going in a two-wheel drive, but it's not really advisable. Drive defensively. Just assume that something is going to happen and drive accordingly. We've got poor road conditions. There are lots of places where the pavement's quite narrow. We will be going up Moteng Pass, which is very steep, has hairpin bends, and has frequent accidents on those bends. So the photo in the middle there is one of many we could share of two heavy trucks contesting the passage around those bends. This is the primary access to a lot of our construction sites and to Mokhotlong, the district centre. So there is quite a bit of heavy traffic up there. Just take your time and be sensible. Changeable weather conditions, rain, mist, snow. I saw all three of those last week, and we're in summer now, but that didn't stop the fact that there's snow on the high levels. We're driving through mist, driving through cloud, through rain, and the rain can be very heavy. So just be prepared for that. And then the other reality is lots of different users of the road. So pedestrians, animals, children. You have to drive on the assumption that someone or something is going to be jumping out in front of you around the next bend. We've had various incidents on the road, and we prefer not to have any more. So please just drive with due care. So that's our health and safety moment. See if I can. Okay, background to the Lesotho Highlands Phase 2. So the project as a whole, the Lesotho Highlands, goes back many years, and many of you will be very familiar with this background, but we'll try and get everyone up to speed. So way back in the 1980s, there were studies done and a treaty between South Africa and Lesotho, and the driving force behind it is tapping into the water resources of Lesotho in order to supply Gauteng, the Johannesburg-Pretoria region of South Africa. And on the back of that, to maximize development opportunities for Lesotho, including hydropower. There was a lot of development in the 80s, 90s. We'll touch on that in a minute. And then in 2011, the government signed the Phase 2 agreement, which in effect is an updated treaty for a subsequent phase of Lesotho Highlands. As I said, it's two countries involved. So we've got the government of Lesotho on one side, government of South Africa on another. They have created the Lesotho Highlands Water Commission, which is a commission with representatives from the two governments to oversee the entirety of Lesotho Highlands. Then there are implementing agencies, the TCTA on the right there within South Africa, and Lesotho Highlands Development Authority, LHDA, for everything that happens within Lesotho. And at the moment, LHDA has the function of operating and maintaining everything that was previously built, delivery of water, hydropower, and so on, and also of implementing Phase 2 development. So there again, we see the Commission, TCTA on the one side, and then what we're focused on, LHDA, which has a board of directors, it has advisory subcommittees. There's the LHDA organization, and embedded within LHDA is a project management unit, which is where most of the LHDA folk on this call fit in. So there's a unit created specifically to implement phase 2, which is what we're now involved in, and their project management unit. We have procured several dozen different consultants, either as individuals or joint ventures, covering many aspects. And in turn, the engineering consultants have run the process for procuring construction contractors. There are a whole raft of stakeholders, and we have both environmental and engineering panels of experts associated with that. So just homing in on LHDA, there's a chief executive, chief operating officer. Our main interest, there's a divisional manager for different aspects of LHDA, and we come under divisional manager for phase 2, Dadian Sodi. I'm not sure if he's managed to be on the call. And then he has a branch manager for the body hardy operation. So he's already got a team of LHDA staff up on site, mainly looking at community relations at this stage, but obviously that'll change once there's something to operate. There's the project management unit, which is driving all of the different aspects here. And still to be appointed, there's hydropower to come. Just a little bit of an overview. So Lesotho sits surrounded by South Africa. We've got some substantial mountain ranges, and almost all of Lesotho drains ultimately into what becomes the Orange River, which is the Caledon and the Senqu within Lesotho. And the project effectively captures the headwaters, the upper catchments of all the tributaries of the Senqu, and uses a system of tunnels to divert due north. So instead of heading out to the west and ultimately to the Atlantic Ocean through some fairly arid regions, the water is progressively captured and transferred northwards towards Gauteng. I mentioned phase 1, so the early stages of that were Katsi Dam. Many of you will be familiar with the iconic concrete arch dam with a substantial reservoir and a tunnel running north from that, the transfer tunnel through Mwela hydropower station, delivery tunnel, discharging into the Ash River in the Free State, which ultimately discharges into the water supply for Gauteng. That was supplemented by Mahali Dam with a tunnel linking into Katsi. So this is just capturing another tributary of the Senqu, putting the water into Katsi, which goes the same way. Phase 2 water transfer, which is currently under construction. Body Hardy Dam, capturing again headwaters of the Senqu, Body Hardy transfer tunnel, again using the same system through Mwela. So progressively, Mwela is getting more and more water going through, generating more and more electricity. That's a 72 megawatt hydropower scheme at Mwela. What we're looking at now is not quite, but nearly freestanding scheme, Oxbow hydropower. This is actually in the headwaters of the Madibamatsu River that feeds Katsi Dam. So we're actually capturing some of the water that would otherwise go to Katsi and then through Mwela, and building a scheme here. And we're obviously going to focus on that in a minute. So water transfer, I didn't mention, but each of these reservoirs floods large areas. So for instance, Body Hardy covers 50 square kilometers of river valley. And so we've got environmental, social, health impact studies, consultations, action plans, implementing the action plan. So there's a very large environmental and social program. And Memakana will talk a little bit about some of that, but there's running in water transfer, and there'll be something similar on Oxbow. There's a whole lot of advanced infrastructure, roads, bridges, power, telecoms, and so on. Body Hardy Dam, 165 meters high concrete face rockfill dam. Body Hardy transfer tunnel, 38 kilometers long tunnel. And many of you will be aware that the construction contracts for those have been awarded within the last couple of weeks, and that's all been notified. So after quite a while, we're now moving out of the development phase into construction of these major assets on the water transfer component. So just homing in there, Podihadi Dam, which captures the Kubedu and the Senkwu transfer tunnel, which discharges into Katsi Reservoir and then picks up that existing system. We don't really need to focus too much on that, but that's all under construction now. For hydropower, we've got a parallel set of studies. So environmental, social, health impact studies. And later this morning, we've got the briefings on contracts for those, which will be running in parallel with the engineering. Makanolo will mention a little bit more about that. Within this current engineering contract that we're talking about, we need temporary and permanent infrastructure, like roads, power, telecoms, housing, buildings, services. All of the infrastructure associated with the project is all encompassed within this engineering terms of reference. There are quarries, site establishment, and then the actual core of the works. So dam, headrace tunnel, power station, transfer tunnel, possible further power station, transmission system. So it's a very broad sweeping engineering scope, quite an exciting project, quite frankly. Just quickly looking at that. So Oxbow Dam right up in the Highlands, and at the visit tomorrow, we're not physically going to be able to get to the dam because it'll involve quite a long hike, take us all day, but we can see this area. There's a low pressure headrace tunnel cutting through the ridge, then portal, surge chamber and portal valve house, high pressure penstock running down to a power station which discharges into a river, and then a transfer tunnel, so weir and transfer tunnel, and possibly, if it's economic, a second powerhouse. There's of the order of 600 meters head on the first powerhouse. There's of the order of 100 meters head on potential second powerhouse. And that then discharges into the existing Whaler Reservoir, which is a tail pond of the existing Whaler hydropower scheme. And the water then rejoins all the water transfer water and heads off down the delivery tunnel into South Africa. Okay, I'm going to hand over briefly to Makanolo. Do you want to take over now, May?
Thank you, John, and good morning, everyone. As John has indicated, my name is Makanolo Kumalo, and I am the functional manager based in the project management unit, responsible for environmental and social issues in the project. The water transfer part of the project, we have developed quite a number of documents that are guiding us while implementing the environmental and social program. These documents have been designed or developed in line with the international best practice as well as the local legal framework. We have guidelines that guide us on the labor recruitment, especially unskilled labor in the project area, issues of land access, communications with different stakeholders, communications with our communities that we are affecting. We have a community complaints management procedure and policies and guidelines that guide on the procurement of goods and services. So the service providers that are working on the project need to be familiar with those documents so that we are able to comply with them. As you know, the project is located in the highlands of Lesotho, and the area is known to be having pristine biodiversity. So we need to be making sure that we are managing the environment and the communities around that area in a way that will not be detrimental in the end. We are going to have a separate session, as John has indicated, later on actually at 12 noon today, where we will take the prospective bidders on through on the environmental and social impact assessment consulting services that we are in the process of procuring. And then later on today at 3 p.m. we will have a similar session with the prospective bidders for resettlement action planning. So the ESIA, as I indicated, is going to be done by others. And then we would expect the supervising engineer to develop environmental management plans that are going to form part of the environmental specifications in the contract for the contractor. The ESIA and the EMP will help us in obtaining a record of decision from the Department of Environment. And then the supervising engineer will be responsible to ensure that the contractor complies with the requirements of the record of decision that emanates from the ESIA. The pictures are just really to show you the diversity of the biodiversity that we have in the highlands of Lesotho, and the fact that while we do our work there, we need to be cognizant of their availability. Next slide, John. On community participation and mitigation of social impacts. As I indicated, we are going to engage a resettlement action plan consultant who is going to work closely with the supervising engineer to mitigate the social impacts, especially resettlement and relocation of communities in that area. We need to make sure that when we have the contractors on board, they have access to land that has been expropriated and compensated for. This means that our consultants need to be following our guidelines, as I indicated, the communications protocol that we have that guide on how we communicate with different stakeholders. We have a robust public relations program, and we have officers that are based in the field that manage that interface between us and the stakeholders. As I have indicated, we will later on have 2 sessions, and those of you who may be interested to learn more about what we are doing or what we intend to do on the environmental and resettlement programs, please feel free to join. Edwin will share the links to those meetings. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to emphasize there, we are running parallel consultancies. There is a need for close coordination and cooperation, firstly at the planning stage, so that the engineering is done with a mind to impact on communities. So some elements of the feasibility, for instance, involve putting the works in the middle of villages, which is probably not wise. So those kind of issues need to be looked at during design development, and then during the physical construction, ensuring that the contractors maintain appropriate relations with the communities. We do have difficulty with some elements of consultants and contractors who have difficulty realizing that driving through the middle of someone's plot is not an acceptable practice. So all those areas are something that impacts on you, even if you're not immediately directly responsible for the environmental and social aspects. There is a joint responsibility there. Thank you very much, May. Okay, homing in on what it is that this particular contract is about. So we're following a pattern we developed for the water transfer contracts, and there's a flow through a process. And again, it's quite a comprehensive process that the engineering is looking at. So there's what we've called preliminary design, which is really taking feasibility studies. In this particular case, there are 2 different feasibility studies from many years apart, which came to slightly different conclusions, and any information available now, and then refining and fixing concept design, the preliminary design. And that's a very key process to get client buy-in to this is what we're going to build. In some ways, it's almost the most interesting bit of the whole process from an engineering point of view. It's fixing the optimum scheme. From that, you then develop the tender design, tender documents, and you manage the procurement of contractors. Now, Mike and Nello mentioned some of our templates and so on. We'll touch on that, but a lot of this tender documents and so on, we've now got templates for a lot of this process for the procurement. Having procured the contractors, you're looking at construction, design and drawings, construction drawings, supervision of the works, which includes safety, health, environmental, social, quality, all aspects of overseeing the contractor. And then once that's drawing to a close, commissioning, training and handover. Obviously on hydropower, that's a particularly significant element. It's a bit less dramatic when you're looking at the water transfer, where having built a dam and a tunnel, the operational input is fairly modest. On the hydropower, that's getting that right is quite important. You've got your own project management and reporting, so managing on your own contract, managing the contractor's contract, and then, as we keep emphasizing, liaising and interfacing with others. So homing in there, for administrative and management purposes, we break down the consultant scope into 3 stages. So stage 1 is tender design and documentation. Stage 2 is the detailed design and the construction monitoring, construction supervision. And stage 3 is the assessment and closeout, basically during the defects period. Looking in their tender design, so you gain project management, contract admin, so you're reporting. There's quite a substantial reporting requirement from the consultant, monthly reporting. Risk management, quality management, occupational safety, cost control, resource management. This is all management of your own contract. And particularly since you're likely to be doing this as a freestanding office in Maseru, it's a bit more onerous than just slotting into your own company systems. So there's quite a bit of reporting there to LHDA. Preliminary design, so you're going to be reviewing existing studies, doing field reconnaissance, doing some topo survey. We do have LiDAR survey, aerial photography and LiDAR contour survey, digital terrain model, but you're going to have to prove that locally and plug any gaps, probably around key structures. There's a review of existing geotechnical investigation results. And in fact, if you look in the tender document, proposal document, there's also setting up further geotechnical investigations. In other words, identifying any gaps. Once you've fixed your scheme, there's almost inevitably going to be some need for some local site investigations to fill in gaps in the existing ones. And you're going to run that and feed the information into your design as you proceed. Preliminary designs, you're going to be looking at main works, the work areas, do a HAZOP, look at constructability, and then the output is preliminary design report, cost estimate, program, and so on. Your environmental services. So, as we said, you've got another consultant doing ESIA, which will actually include an outline EMP, but you're going to take that, develop it, incorporate it in your tender documents, and then produce environmental application. Health and safety specs. You're going to prepare tender documents. Those are going to be based on FIDIC Red Book type contracts. There certainly we'll have to look at the E&M plant as to whether we do that slightly differently. That's likely to be probably Yellow Book, but looking at the contractual aspects there. So again, there's a study of how to package the tender documents, how many construction contracts to have, what form of contract. But LHDA has fairly closely followed the traditional FIDIC style route of engineer design, contractor construction under engineer supervision. So something that most of us are familiar with. We haven't done what is popular in other parts of the world of the design build turnkey type approach for hydropower projects, and it's extremely unlikely that we'd follow that approach here. So you're going to manage procurement. So there's tendering, evaluation, negotiation. Obviously, particularly negotiations and everything before that, the client is going to be reviewing and having an eye on what's happening involved in that, but you're going to drive the process. So I mentioned templates. There is a mountain of policies, procedures, protocols, frameworks, all developed for water transfer, which will need to be picked up and adapted to be appropriate for hydropower. Now, the hydropower is a Lesotho government development, whereas water transfer is a combined Lesotho, South Africa, with South Africa as the beneficiary and the ultimate paymaster. So there may be slight tweaks, slight changes. Funding routes may be slightly different. So we'll have to look at that in terms of some of these policies and frameworks, but in general, we're going to be taking an existing set of documentation. Similarly, for the tender documents, we have templates for tender documents, and we'd expect to take those and adapt them as necessary for the hydropower. Stage 2, detailed design, construction supervision. So again, you're going to prepare the detailed design. So the engineer is going to do the full detailed design of all the permanent works. That includes reinforcement drawings. It's very explicit in the RFP. Do not put in a bid which in effect says, we're doing this cheaply because the contractor is going to do all our work for us. If you do, you're non-compliant. So let's just be clear about that. I don't want to have to go through that argument again. The RFP is clear. Obviously, with the mechanical electrical equipment, the approach is slightly different, but you're going to be doing a very full and detailed technical specification for that. You're going to kick off the construction, supervise construction. You run progress meetings, reporting, all the check monitoring, commissioning, and project management. So fairly traditional roles, but a fairly intensive reporting regime. Closeout, you're going to be looking at snagging during defects, again, monitoring the closeout of the environmental issues, supervision, claims management, closing those out. Unfortunately, experience says that the contractual claims are likely to carry on a little while after the construction is finished. There are a number of completion reports. Okay, just going back to that preliminary design, just focusing on that briefly. I've mentioned reviewing what we've got there. We have 2 feasibility studies. Okay, one 3 or 4 years old, one 30 or 40 years old. One recommends an RCC dam, one recommends a CFRD. You're going to be looking at those, assessing the pros and cons, assessing the cost, and fixing the dam type in consultation with the client. You're going to be doing all the standard things of hydrology, flood routing, spillway design, sedimentation, seismic studies, everything you'd associate with the dam. Similarly, head race, there's an intake structure, low pressure head race tunnel, high pressure penstock. You'll be looking at all the surge and transient conditions, looking at isolating it, support and lining conditions, construction. There's a whole history of tunnel systems in Lesotho, what's worked, what hasn't worked, lessons learned. And in your initial studies, you're going to look at that and come up with your recommendations. We've got a mixture of tunnels in drill and blast, TBM, open gripper TBMs, shielded segmental lining TBMs, you name it, we've done it. So there's lots of good precedent for different conditions, and you'll be looking at all that and coming up with your recommendations. Powerhouses, again, layout, civil, structural, mechanical, electrical. With a 600-meter head, I think it's the feasibility study is fairly clear that you'd be looking at a Pelton system in the powerhouse, in the main powerhouse. The Nkwe one with 100 meters head, well, again, that'll need looking at and deciding exactly what the optimum is there. This transfer tunnel, again, sizing, locating how it's going to be built, transmission, looking at infrastructure, site establishment, roads. Again, I mean, we'll see briefly in the site visit, but finding the right quarry material. We've got basalt, dolerite, and the sedimentary series. Excuse me. We've used the variations on the theme of basalt and dolerite in many structures in the highlands. Getting the best material is sometimes a challenge, and sometimes you have to work with what you've got. So the whole issue of quarries, aggregate, looking at the concrete design in terms of the available materials, that's all an interesting area. And then looking at HAZOP studies, constructability. Okay, what is this project? So slightly lower than 100 meters high RCC or CFRD. The top reservoir actually floods the existing road and a couple of tourist lodges. So there's a road and services diversion. There's a gated power intake and a 6.6 kilometer long head race, which is essentially a relatively low pressure head race. I say low pressure, I mean, with 100 meters high dam, then you can have at least 100 meters head on it. Portal valve house, 3 kilometer long steel penstock, down to a surface powerhouse. And again, the feasibility study, you'll be looking at this, but it has 4 23 MVA generators, associated transformers and equipment. That probably needs looking at and optimizing. This is very much a peaking station. We've got a good head, we've got a limited catchment. So this is only going to operate a few hours a day, and just optimizing that is worth studying. There's a tail race channel, then there's a diversion weir, another transfer tunnel going into the reservoir and potentially into a second powerhouse. So that potential surface powerhouse, double transmission lines. There's a little bit of a question as to whether it's single or double transmission lines, but anyway, transmission lines from each power station to the existing boiler site, but a new substation, and that's about 6 kilometers. All the infrastructure, construction infrastructure, all the permanent infrastructure. Homing in there, again, these are you have all this information in the RFP pack. So you can see the dam, an intake on I mean, it's a very classic river profile there, swinging backwards and forwards. The dam at one point, intake elsewhere, head race tunnel. Coming down to, so whoops, I can see a spelling error there. Surge chamber, portal valve house, penstock, powerhouse, so on. So that's that drawing is in your pack. Now I'm going to focus on the procurement aspects. We are following a pattern that we've used repeatedly and reasonably successfully for all of our engineering consultancy contracts. So it's a pretty well-established process. Within, and we're operating, I mean, our mandate comes from a treaty, the Phase 2 agreement between the two governments. So we are bound to follow the requirements of that treaty. And it has a specific section, Article 10, on procurement. And among other things, it refers to competitiveness, transparency, cost effectiveness, quality. It does identify preference to Lesotho, then South Africa, then SADC, then international. It says JVs must be on a voluntary basis. In the earlier stages of the project, there were some forced marriages where South Africa and Lesotho each selected a consultant, and then those two were forced to work together, which worked fairly well in most cases. But this is you form your own JV. And then there's this issue of preference margins, and we'll home in on that in a minute. The essential objective there is to build capacity within Lesotho and South Africa. And that definitely rolls through the evaluation process. So the RFP, I don't know how many of you have actually looked at the detail, but it's in 11 sections. You've got an invitation. Then instructions to bidders, which all looks quite boring, but you need to read because there are spelt out in that all kinds of detail about how you've got to go about putting your proposal together. There's the general one, and then there's the specifics, 2A and 2B, two different parts. In terms of reference, it's pretty comprehensive. It tells you what you've got to do. It doesn't tell you how you're going to do it. You're supposed to be the experts on that. There's a technical proposal, a whole lot of standard forms with a checklist for you to sign off. And you provide details of your organization, your structure, your methodology, your people, and so on. There's a separate financial proposal with your commercial status and the financial details of your offer. And that separate is very important. There's the anti-corruption policy I've mentioned. We spell out to you at a high level how we'll do the evaluation. So it's very clear. We've got a point scoring system, and this is where the points go, and this is how we do the evaluation. There's standard template contract forms, which come into play once we actually select a preferred bidder. That's the eventual agreement, guarantees, and so on. The particular conditions, so the general conditions of contract are FIDIC White Book, and we've been running with White Book 2006 for a long time now. We will carry on with that version simply because all our systems are geared around it. There is an update from FIDIC, but it doesn't really change the fundamentals. So we'll stick with FIDIC White Book 2006. You'll see the particular conditions in the RFP. There's a brief note on tax requirements. That's very much your responsibility. But you need to be familiar with that. And then there's the details of remuneration and payment. And just on the remuneration and payment, we'll probably get some more details later, but at a very high level, in essence, all of your initial design stage deliverables are a series of lump sum payments against a deliverable. And that's spelled out in the document. Your site supervision, it's essentially a monthly charge per person on site. So we handle payment, remuneration payment in two completely different ways. One is deliverable based, and the other is in effect a form of time charge. On the basis that when you're bidding, you can't know for certain exactly what your supervision team is going to be. Okay, I've got a series of slides now about proposal preparation. I mentioned we've been using this system for quite a while. We had challenges, particularly when we started. If you don't read the RFP, and if you don't use our template, you're going to get into trouble. So it has been advertised. You're responding to those adverts. Respond to the instructions to bidders. Read them carefully. Do not ignore them. Use the templates. There's a reason that we've developed those templates, because they ask for the information we want to look at. And just to emphasize a point, if you send us a whole lot of glossy brochures, we'll ignore them, because we want you to document the information that we're going to use to evaluate you. So use those templates. It's a lot of work, but it's a major contract. So you have to decide, am I going to invest the effort to do this properly? or not? And if not, don't waste your time. Just don't bid. Either do it properly and give us something worthwhile, or decide that it's not worth bidding. So the first stage is that technical. There's a quality-based evaluation. The minimum pass is 70%. Now, if you don't pass the 70%, we won't open your financial proposal. So you could have bid at the keenest price imaginable, but if you don't pass the technical, we won't even look at it. We will never know what you bid, and we won't be interested. So that's the first point. You have to meet that technical threshold. And again, our experience says that actually the threshold we've set, it was a bit of a thumbsuck when we started, but it has proved to be a fairly accurate predictor. Anyone who's absolutely marginal on that has tended to give us trouble down the line, to be honest. Anyone who satisfactorily achieves that, comfortably achieves that percentage, tends to be the good performer. So there is a real reason for having that quality-based evaluation. So the lowest price is not guaranteed to win. We will not accept late tenders, and we simply will not accept them. Look at the website. In the early days, we haven't updated it for a long time, but there are some notes on what happens if, and guidance notes. But essentially what they all say is respond to the request for proposals and you're fine. And if you fail to respond, then it's not going to work. Specific procurement requirements. So 13th of March, you've been given a lot of time. We recognise there wasn't a lot of notice for this. Forming joint ventures is challenging, but you've been given a good length of time. So do not squeal that, oh, it's impossible to put together a bid in this time. You've got plenty of time to give us a good proposal. We won't accept late submissions. Use the bid form. Sorry if this is tub thumping, but this is bitter experience. You need to have suitable authorization with power of attorney. Section 2A is our instructions to bidders. There's a whole lot of clauses there about eligibility and disqualification. Now, for most of you, those clauses simply won't apply. Not a problem. But go through them and make sure that they don't apply. Because again, if you're ineligible for whatever reason, then don't waste your time. Look at those, go through. If you need to seek clarification, seek clarification. And then, key point, I mentioned this business of preference. There are mandatory minimum requirements for a minimum of a 10% participation by Basutu consultants, 20% participation by South African consultants, and of that 20%, 20% of the 20% must be South African black-owned enterprises. Now, in South Africa, BOE, black-owned enterprise, it has a legal meaning in terms of the regulations there. So those who are should not understand that. I mean, in simple terms, it has to have a majority ownership by South African black persons and genuine management control. Now, those are conditions of award of the contract. In other words, if you don't meet those, you won't get the contract. So there will be an opportunity if there's some minor query to sort that out at negotiation. But in principle, the contract will not be awarded to a bidder who does not meet those requirements. Going on a bit more, the particulars are on 2B, so that's dates and addresses. We have spotted my error. There is one incorrect email address given. There's the correct email address, and then hidden in there somewhere, there's an incorrect email address that got copied from another document. We'll correct that in an addendum. The pre-bid meeting we're in, 2-envelope system. So you've got your technical submission and your financial submission. When we say envelope, the details are there for, it'll either be, you either submit CDs in a particular way or you submit online. Personally, I think our experience of the e-procurement online system has been very good, very effective, and I could recommend it. Sometimes CDs give hiccups in terms of not being able to open them or peculiar formatting and things. But anyway, you've got the option either CD or online. You've got the opportunity to bid in Maloti, which are directly equivalent to Rand, and one other convertible currency. So I would imagine for something as challenging as this hydropower, many of the bidders are going to have an international partner, and you can use a convertible currency. So whether that's euros, dollars, pounds, and so on. Renminbi are not a convertible currency, by the way. 120 days validity of bids. There's an email address given for requests for clarification, and we will take your requests by email. We will publish the requests with the response to everybody who's expressed interest in this. So we'll take, one reason for you registering for this call is so we get a list of email addresses. We will build an email register of everyone who's drawn documents, everyone who's attended the pre-bid meeting, and you will all receive emails with the requests for clarification and the responses. And as and when necessary, addenda will be issued in the same way. Once the bids are submitted, do not attempt to communicate with us. That's seen as interference with a bidding process, unless we specifically approach you for particular clarifications. So it's always possible when we open your document that there's a page missing somewhere or something that's a little confusing or whatever. We do not allow you to rebid, but we do allow you, if we've got a particular query, just to clarify something. So that's the only communication we would accept during the evaluation team. The evaluation team really is in a bubble, it's isolated, there's no external influence during the bid evaluation process. Don't attempt to approach or influence in any way, because that is automatic grounds for disqualification. We've had instances of various people being approached, and you're not doing yourselves any favors by doing that. So, carrying on with the requirements. You may associate with others in joint ventures or as subconsultants. I would imagine on something as multidisciplinary as this, particularly with the nationality requirements, it's almost inevitable that you're going to be looking at joint ventures. Once the bids come in, we will post a list of bidders. Negotiations and so on, we'll follow through with in due course. You do need to declare the availability of your key staff, and the CVs have to be signed either by the individual or by an authorized representative on their behalf. And please read the CVs before you submit them. We occasionally get rubbish. We've had CVs which are actually someone else's CV, which is pretty obvious at the time. Often we know the individuals and we see nonsense in there. So, or we see claims of academic or professional registration, which we do check, which are untrue. So don't play those games, because you're going to end up disqualifying yourselves. There was one very major bid where this later point, ensure key staff only appear in one proposal. We do not want to see a team appearing or individuals appearing in multiple proposals. And there was one bidder where he'd approached someone who was already in another bid, and that individual put himself in multiple bids, and they then lost all the points associated with that individual. So in fact, there was one very competent organization which failed the technical evaluation because of that one mistake. So just be very careful. Once we get through the whole process and confirm an award, then all the information is posted on the LHDA website. And in fact, if you go on there, excuse me, you can see that information on our existing contracts. Excuse me, one of the side effects of going in the mountains in rain and fog and snow. I've now got a cold. Preference requirements, just to focus on those again, just to emphasize them. There's a whole complex series of preference requirements. So the C2 national firms. It's a condition of award that there's more than 10% of the SUTU organisation, black-owned South African companies. And then there are requirements for the SUTU national individuals. So it's not just the corporate involvement, it's the individuals, South African black individuals. And then there's a point scoring system for RSA black, women, youth, persons with disabilities, and so on. And then finally, there's a condition of award of at least 3% of your total costs go on skills development. Skills development can be all kinds of things, but if you're taking and training staff within your organization, that's skills development. If you're taking and training suppliers, that's skills development. So it's not that you go out and hand out bursaries, it's that that's perfectly legitimate. It's that you are developing skills and showing what part of your turnover is doing that. So that is important that you do that. And if you're struggling with the interpretation of what's in there, ask for clarification and we'll give it. As I mentioned, those guidelines and feedback from the previous ones, they're a bit old now, but the issues are still the same. We still get the same problems. There are checklists there. Again, use the templates, give us all the information. Disqualification. It is extremely disheartening for us as well as for you when you're simply disqualified because you failed to meet some requirement. There's a disclosure statement on anti-corruption, document delivery. Let's move on. Just some areas of the actual proposal. So all this is spelled out in section 7, but just to emphasize it, we don't want to award a contract to an organization where they're stretched to the limit to run our contract. So we look at what your overall JV turnover is, and if this contract is an excessive percentage of your total turnover, then that's a risk factor for us. If we're merely one of many large contracts, then that is not a risk factor for us. So there's some points there. It's not huge, but there are points there. We look at the general capability of the firms in the team, experience, staff numbers of the firms, and then we look at the roles of the team members, the organizational structure. You've got to come to us showing us how it's going to work. Southern Africa, ideally, you've done similar projects within the region. And if it's not specifically hydropower, you've done major civil projects or something similar that shows that you know how to work here. And specifically Lesotho, there are challenges. If you're just, region might include Gauteng, but if you've never worked outside Gauteng, setting up and running a business, an office, a team in Lesotho has its own challenges. And so we're interested in seeing that. Look at the projects, and if you're submitting project data sheets, part of this is showing example projects. Again, it helps if those projects are, first of all, linked to this region, similar work in the region, and secondly, linked to the team that's going to be doing the work. We'll get on to that. So, give experience linked to the proposed team. We have had, South Africa has many branch offices of large international firms. If we see a whole lot of projects being run by another office on another continent with no connection whatsoever with the team that's going to bid the job, that's a lot less convincing than projects in the region where the individuals have been involved. We know that the people and the project and the organization all have that capability. So that's part of our looking at this. And again, we have had cases where the projects, they're very impressive, but they actually bear no relation to the team that's going to be doing the job. And then you have to question how relevant they are. Look at the services provided, not just the construction works. So for consultants, you do many things on a project. You might have designed, detailed, supervised, done the entire process of creating and administering a project. Or you might have an individual go for 3 days to offer some advice to a client. It's rather different. So spelling out what services you offer is just as important as describing this wonderful project. And again, it's one reason for the format of our sheets. We actually want to know that. If I just see your glossy brochures, quite often you're describing these wonderful construction projects, but don't say what you did, and you hide whether it was large or small. So show the services provided, link any key staff, and try and demonstrate the full scope of services. Now, this is a very broad technical scope. It's a very broad timescale from concept through to delivery of construction. The claims and commercial side is important. So try and demonstrate your competence in all those areas. And one thing the evaluators may well know individuals, organizations, but they will evaluate based on the information you provide. Again, from individuals, I've had CVs which say, you all know me, I'm wonderful, end. And you get no points for that. So you need to look at what we're looking for and make sure it's referenced in the CVs, in the project description, in your submission. We ask for client references. Now, those can be a bit of a challenge to get, but they are important that we know that what we're receiving does have references to back it. Key staff, I'm going to emphasize this. If you look at the RFP on the technical evaluation, 55 out of 100 marks go to your key staff. And the reason is that ultimately that's what we're getting. We're getting that team. So use the CV template, check it, look at the target criteria. We score against those criteria against that CV. And again, we've had CVs in where we know that this individual ticks those boxes, but the CV doesn't say so. So they get marked down. Again, show the roles and responsibilities, not just the project details. The academic requirements are mandatory generally. If you look, there's a description of should have and must have, and the must have, must have. And if they don't have, they get 0. So look at that scoring. The should have says, we expect him to be at least this, but if he's a bit less than that in one area, maybe he makes it up in another area, or she does. So CV signed, we do check the CV data. And if you've put in this most wonderful CV and then we look at your submission and discover that there's actually 3-person days allocated to that individual, we're going to mark down the CV because we're not really getting that person at all. So if you're putting tiny level of effort, inappropriate level of effort against an individual, we will damp down the score on that CV to reflect that. And as I mentioned earlier, one rejected CV could actually cost you the bid. And price and preference don't help if you fail technically. Just again, experience of weaknesses. If you're the project manager of a design project in your home office, you're operating within the environment of a complete corporate system, and you're really purely focused on deliverables. If you're the project manager running a multinational team in an independent project office in Maseru, you're effectively running a branch office, running a business, and running a project. And that is an extremely demanding role. It really is. So I've had people say, why do we need a project manager? You need a project manager. And they actually have to be a manager. We've got a separate person who's the chief design engineer who's actually running the technical deliverables. But that project manager is a key role, and it's a very difficult role. Your contract engineers, particularly during construction, are going to be facing a dedicated expert contractor claims team. And they actually need experience of this type of contract in this kind of environment. And we've had examples of people who've done it very well and people who struggled. So it is a key role. Chief resident engineer, again, he's going to be leading a large international staff administering a multi-billion rand contract and supervising an internationally experienced contractor. It is a very demanding role. If you're used to owner's engineer with a designer's site representative on a turnkey project, that designer's site representative has a completely different role to a chief resident engineer under a FIDIC Red Book. And you need to interrogate that yourselves, because we will interrogate it if we see someone where we think that he's not actually done a true resident engineer FIDIC style role. You're all going to be in JVs. Each member of the JV will be fighting for its share. There's not a lot of point you getting a wonderful share of the JV if the JV doesn't win the job. So my recommendation, and I used to sit on the other side of the table, get the best available skills for the key staff, offer the best team regardless of your JV politics, use your international and your parent firms effectively, and make up your balance or however it goes further down the line, but get that core team as the absolute best you can manage. We've got resource schedules there. So we've specified the supervision simply because we've had painful experience of organizations grossly underbidding the supervision element on the basis that we'll make it up later and they'll get their money back. It's not very good for anyone. So we specified the supervision for the purposes of the proposal. As I mentioned, the design stage, those are lump sum deliverables. You need to provide adequate resource. Use the program timelines that are given. I mentioned if you've got inadequate inputs, and staff will be marked down. We've specified the site team with a shift cover. You're accountable for delivering the service. That bid price includes all parts of the terms of reference, which are not explicitly priced. So don't assume that you can come back later and say, oh, well, our price didn't include ABC. There are penalties on one or two key deliverable points. In other words, the critical points where delay here delays the overall project. So there are some penalties on program and on preference, so be aware of those. Right. Site visit tomorrow. Not everyone on this call will be going on it, but we've given GPS coordinates. Those coordinates are for what in effect is a parking area at the very top of the Moteng Pass. So you're going through or around Booty up the A1 on the Mokhotlong Road, up the Moteng Pass, drive carefully, and at the top, literally as you crest out at the top of the pass, there's a parking area. It's not necessarily part of the visit as such, but it's a convenient starting point. From there, we will visit different parts of the hydropower. We can't get close to some of it, but it's enough to get a flavour of what you're looking at. We will commence promptly at 11 o'clock. Just follow LHDA, keep in sight, drive safely. We've done many of these site visits. Sometimes we get people who are somewhat overconfident and they know what they're doing and they head off and lose the convoy. I mean, the convoy is pretty tedious and irritating, having a couple of dozen vehicles all in convoy. But if you go off and do your own thing, you're obviously going to miss out on what's happening. So I'll be delighted to see you there. I mean, many of those on this call will be there from our team as well. And we'll aim to show you in broad outline what the site looks like. So you're muted. I see that there are a number of items on the chat. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but use the Teams chat. I see some of these are just people registering their details there. Anything we say in response to this, I'll start going through this just now, having a look. As I mentioned, that's for guidance. We will attempt to respond to everything, and If you think of something after this, and I'm sure there'll be things that come up as you dig into the documents do have that procurement at lhwp2pmu.co.ls. That's our procurement email address. Send your email there and we will respond to it. Thank you. Right, I'm just going to try you. We have a whole raft. So I'm just going to work through. I see many of these are people registering. All right. I see that you lost me for a minute. I'm sorry, I can't present and read all the chat at the moment. Can one of my team tell me, or one of the PMU members, did we lose anything significant? Do I need to go back somewhere? Eddie Macanello, is there something I ought to return to?
John, I don't think so. I'm just trying to see where we lost you. It was fairly early on, and I think it was during the overview of the
Okay.
yeah. But I think if some of people attending, if they have any specific query around what you said during that time, then they can maybe just post a note. But I don't think you need to go back.
Okay, thank you very much, Eddie. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down through. Okay, there's a query which was responded. For someone who missed the first part. So yes, as we mentioned, it will be uploaded on the website. It'll probably take us a little time, but it will be uploaded on the website and everyone will be able to pick that up. That was a query. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down. Mostly many questions in here. Okay. All right at the end, I think, is that the last one? So the very last one. Could you kindly, if the project is going to be financed? Okay, finance for the project. Right now, the government of Lesotho has set aside funds for this study stage. So there is a significant amount of money set aside by the government of Lesotho for the three proposal documents that are out at the moment. Once we have the project properly defined, then for implementation construction, there'll be another process to look at funding. Right now, we have a feasibility study, as I mentioned. For various reasons, that was finished just before, well, it was finished early because the funding for that was time limited and we hadn't used the money, but we'd run out of time. And so our feasibility study is not quite wrapped up and it's not in a state which could be taken to a funding agency as it stands. So that's one reason for this separate ESIA and for the preliminary design. So essentially we will take the project to a point where we've got a business case to go to funding agencies. That doesn't affect the funding at this point because that money has been set aside by the government of Lesotho. There is a general point that Lesotho is extremely keen to develop hydropower. There's a strong desire to do this. So as long as we can come up with a credible scheme, I think, and at the moment, hydropower is internationally supported. There was a time earlier in my career when it was very difficult to get funding for hydropower. Now I think for a country like Lesotho, they should be able to get funding for hydropower as long as it's a credible scheme. high head scheme like this, we hope we can get a credible scheme. So there is funding, and it's not linked to the water transfer Government of South Africa funding for the Body Hardy system. It is a separate Lesotho responsibility, but we've got funding for now, and the actual construction, that's to come. Now, I've got to go back up. Sorry, I'm seeing far more. Okay, the link for the midday and 3 o'clock sessions, it's a separate Teams call. Has Edwin put those on here? They're certainly available somewhere. They'll be available on the website. I'm not sure if Edwin's posted them on here. Edwin, have you posted those details on here and I've missed it?
John, this is Eddie. I think he has. Let me just scroll up while you can carry on with the other question.
Okay, so I think Edwin was planning to post the links on here, but if they're not, if you don't find them here, they'll be on our website, on the procurement website under the relevant procurement for 12 o'clock. Now I've got a very detailed question from Tractor Bell. I'm not going to attempt to answer that verbally. So there's a Tractor Bell query about our precise method of scoring for experience of different projects. I think I'll tie myself in knots if I try and do that verbally now. So make a note, and we will pick that one up and respond to it formally, because I think trying to do that verbally is going to be misleading. So excuse me, I'm just making a note. That's okay. No, I mean, you're taking it seriously. That's fine.
Sorry, John, can I quickly interrupt?
Yes, please.
Edwin has posted the links for the 6038 and the 6039 pre-bid meeting, so people can just scroll up and they'll get the link. Thank you. Okay,
thank you very much, Eddie. So there, if you scroll up through the chat function, you will find those links, and you'll be able to join in 40 minutes time, and then one this afternoon. Professional registration. It's a bit of a sore point. Lesotho doesn't have a professional registration body, but then nor does Lesotho actually issue degrees in engineering. They get them elsewhere, and the professional engineers typically are registering, I mean, most typically in South Africa as PREng. So many of the people I work with have PREng. So that's how it's dealt with in Lesotho. To meet those requirements for those key staff, then we expect professional registration. And again, we can respond formally to that, but that's how we've dealt with it. As I say, I mean, if you said a Lesotho could only have Lesotho qualifications, well, there's not even an engineering degree in Lesotho. So we just take it on that basis. Okay, I've just scrolled past the links. I see the links. Okay, there's a query here about LHDA expectations with respect to the design office in Lesotho. So do we expect the chief design engineer to be resident full-time in Lesotho, at least during stage 1? I think that needs a proper formal response in terms of the terms of reference, but the requirement is for a core presence here, particularly during stage 1, where there's a lot of interfacing, but we don't require all the design to happen in Maseru. We have previously insisted on the design team to be resident here, and anytime anyone's working on the project that they're here. That has given challenges, and we don't necessarily get the best outcome. There are advantages to us, obvious advantages in having everything in Maseru, and sometimes there are problems. So we've advocated flexibility. We've asked you to outline how you're going to address this, but we do require a core presence here in Maseru, and I think it'll be better if we give a formal response to this. But it's a very legitimate question. So, sorry, again, I'm just scribbling a note to myself. And we will clarify that issue. And if the terms of reference are not clear enough, we may even find that we need to add an addendum. Right. Let me keep going. Can you please discuss the stage 1 manpower provisions? Okay, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. What we've done for stage 1, stage 1, we tell you the things that you need to do, the things you need to deliver. Stage 1 is deliverable based, and it's quite comprehensive. We identify key staff that we expect to see. It's up to you to then identify what staff you need in addition to that. And clearly, the key staff is just a small selection which we use in the evaluation process. There's never any intention that that's the total team. You need to look at the terms of reference, plan and resource, and come up with your teams. And if you look at the schedules, basically you're going to have a schedule which has all your staff resources and all their time inputs against each task and subtask. Now, sometimes it's a little bit artificial because an individual will be spreading their time over a number of subtasks and may blur the boundaries. But effectively, you've got to allocate resource. When you come to the financial schedules, you're just going to take that and apply billing rates, and you'll come up with a price. And we will, out of that, we'll pop out a lump sum for do a tender design, do a tender document, and you will be paid against that lump sum. It's up to you to resource, it's up to you to price. On the assumption that you win the job, it's then up to you to deliver. And if you manage to deliver at half of the person days that you bid, then your directors are going to be smiling because you'll get paid a lump sum for that deliverable. If you manage to deliver at double the person days that you promised, your directors are going to be very cross indeed because you will still get the same price. So it's up to you. The basic point is that the organisation best able to estimate and budget and resource for those design tasks, as long as the scope is clearly defined, that's up to you. But there are all the schedules. Look at Section 4 and Section 5 of the RFP. That's for you to put it together, and then you will be reimbursed against those. There are certain items where lump sum's a little bit of a funny term because you've got a project management function all the way through that. So you're going to resource that, we derive a lump sum, and then we simply turn that into monthly installments. So whatever your total for your Task 1 project management comes out at, that'll be reimbursed over the life of stage 1 as a series of monthly installments, because you don't really have a deliverable in the same way. I hope that helps. Okay, so I've got another query about residents in Lesotho. It looks like I'm going to have to home in on that. So project manager, I think we really do expect the project manager to be here in Lesotho. And I think we'll give a written response to that because it's going to get too complicated to do it. There's an element of discretion for you, and there's an element of a minimum requirement. So you can do work in your home offices, but we do want to be dealing with the consultant here in Lesotho, and certainly the client's team are not going to be wandering around the world in order to meet the consultant. So if you do have key staff who are not permanently in Maseru, you're going to have to budget for them coming to Maseru for routine meetings, design meetings, progress meetings, and so on. Okay, I think I'm going to respond to that one formally. Okay, there's a query about environmental social impact and a query about the environmental discharge that might affect the design and the economic viability. So the ESIA will be running in parallel with this. We're not going to complete an ESIA and then do an engineering design. In terms of the environmental release, we will make assumptions. We've got a lot of precedent from existing contracts. We will take precedence from that. We'll probably deliberately build in some flexibility, but in discussion with the client, we will come up with a viable basis for environmental discharges from the Oxbow Reservoir and work on that. And again, as I say, probably deliberately build in some flexibility in the design of the actual outlet works to cater for anything that comes down the line. Even on the current Body Hardy water transfer scheme, we've made a series of assumptions, but then the actual outlet works are designed to accommodate that, plus quite a range beyond that to allow for any future changes in approach. And there's a certain amount of observational approach to study what the impact is downstream once that's built, and if necessary, adjust the environmental discharges to suit. So we'll take a similar approach. I don't think that will be allowed to delay you. Sorry, let me keep going. Okay, I think I've responded to everything there, and I apologize where I've prevaricated, but this whole question of who's resident in Lesotho is obviously a sensitive issue, and I think we need to formalize that as best we can. Are there any more queries? I'm conscious of the fact that my time is now up, and in half an hour there's another session. If anyone's got any last minute queries, put them on the chat, or if I missed it, repeat it on the chat quickly. And then obviously, as we mentioned, we've got the procurement email address, and anything that goes there will be responded to. Anything else coming on the chat? No, I see nothing. Well, on that basis, and I'm sorry if someone's busy typing, but I'm not seeing anything else coming in. On that basis, thank you. Oh, I've got a hand. No. Okay. All right. Okay. On that basis, I'm going to call it quits. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for your participation. And I'm really looking forward to lots of outstanding proposals for this. So with that, I'm going to call it quits. Thank you very much, everybody.